Ross is a very what would you call it? A naturally curious person, and a person who follows on their curiosity. So I think people have curiosities, but the most population, I think, suffers with not following up on that curiosity. Sometimes a question pops up in your head, and you think about it for a second, maybe, and then it requires some effort to go research about it, learn about it, write about it, and that's what we lack. People like me lack. So, so we have people like you.
Do that. You're interviewing people, from different walks of life, so you definitely don't lack the curiosity.
That's where people like you come in, who are doing this God's work of helping people, educating people through the channel of their curiosity. So this brings me to the hardcore questions of Hindu mythology that we thought of covering on this episode,
right?
Which is the timeline of Hindu mythology, right? So I am personally also very confused, and because there are so many opinions, there are so many, knowledge people have given on these topics, that so Hindu mythology, is it a thing of past? Is it history? Is it omnipresent? There are different yug. There's Kali Yuga, Satya Yuga, and whatnot. So for a newbie like me who is born into a Hindu family but hasn't really figured out the whole situation with the Hindu timeline.
Right.
So how do you figure that out, and how can you walk me through it?
So I think it's a very relevant question again. A lot of people get confused because one, we don't have someone in our family who can answer the questions, right? Because religious knowledge is not a part of our upbringing. Right. We get to hear some stories, from our grandparents probably. Our parents are most of the time busy with their careers, while growing up. And again, with the grandparents also, it's more about faith rather than reasoning or logic, right?
Exactly.
So if you have a logical question, you find getting an answer probably a little difficult in your immediate environment. So then again, as you said, if you are curious and if you don't do anything about it, the question will always remain. But if you are inquisitive enough, and you would find a way to get an answer. And I think that's where the relevance of mythology lies. It's just so many thinkers and scholars have always said that, a culture or a race that does not remember its past, it's doomed ultimately, because you do not have any lessons to learn from. This happens in our own lives, right? You have certain experiences while growing up, and you base your further future life based on those experiences, right? On if you've had a certain kind of a environment growing up, your thoughts are molded by that. Your views about life, about people are molded according to the experiences that you have with people while growing up. If you're inside your home, of course, you are in a cocoon, in a protective shelter. But the moment you step out of your house, you go out for studies, you go out for work, and you realize that, world is not all, hunky-dory. There are people of all shades, and you have to learn how to deal with them. And these are your experiences that that mold your behavior, and they also help your future life, deal better with people like this. So I think past is very important. A lot of people focus only on the future, but without the past, without the learnings from the past, your future is again going to be full of the same mistakes. I think for me, that is the relevance of mythology, that there are people who have done a lot of stuff, right? If you go through Mahabharata, you see shades of grey in all the characters, including Krishna. But you see, where he employed his guile and where he followed the dharma. So basically, what was his focus? What was he trying to do? Or similarly for Duryodhana, or for Yudhishthir, or for Arjun, or for Draupadi, who insisted that, her insult be avenged, even if it led to a war. So there are people who have done these historical things, or even if they're not historical. I don't really think that's a very important debate. A lot of people get into it, whether it's historical or not. I think what is more important is the lessons that you get out of these stories, whether they were historical or not. That's a separate discussion altogether. And there are various points, that you can say both pro and con for these for the historicity. But the relevant point for me is the lessons that we need to learn from these stories. Whether it is Indra's stories, Indra was the leader of the gods. He's the king of the gods. Okay, a lot of people don't know that Indra is not the name of a single god. It's a title. Okay, so Indra's change. Wow. Just like a prime minister or a president, Indra is the title of the leader of the gods.
Okay.
So if you, and as an Indra, if you have done something unpardonable, it's written down in the scriptures. And today everybody knows Indra as somebody who did that. Without realizing that there were so many Indras. But the name of Indra is besmirched now, right? So there's a tag, which is now there with Indra, which is not the fault of the other Indras who were there, right? So one Indra did something bad and the entire title got, that bad name.
Yeah.
Right. So these stories are not just stories, these are ways to teach you certain very important lessons of life. There's historical information, there's cultural information in these stories, there's geographical information, about the extent of the civilization and, whether they navigated the oceans or what rivers were important, etc., etc. But the most important thing is the lessons for your life, the management lessons you get, especially people who are who are working now, the young crowd that is just getting into work, especially in these COVID times, right? The post-COVID times. What lessons can be learned from these stories? How do you deal with circumstances? Lord Ram, he was the heir to the kingdom of Ayodhya. Ayodhya was one of the most prosperous kingdoms in India at that time. He was the heir to one of the most prosperous kingdoms, but within one night, he was thrown out of the palace and he was sent into the jungle where he stayed for 14 long years. So, we think that we are unfortunate. Why is this happening with us? But imagine what these people went through. He had to hone his own skills. He had to fight the demons. He had to save his own wife. He had to cross the ocean. And he had to build alliances with, different tribes like the Vanars and stuff. So the stories are not just stories. They teach you very important life lessons. That's my take on it.
Right. I think, also the very accurate point that you mentioned is that people often get fixated on the historicity or was this true? Can you provide me actually scientific?
These are unnecessary debates, I feel, they are very unnecessary debates because history is a different ballgame altogether.
Right.
And again, we all know history is written by the conqueror. Right. So there are different aspects and different perspectives to the history. So it's very, very subjective. I feel what is more important is, as I said, what is the core teaching of that particular story? That is more important.
And I believe that all of these stories and the beginning of the origins of Hinduism, if one might say, come from the holy texts or the scriptures that were discovered, right? So could you maybe tell me something about them? Ved, Purana, I hear them all around me, ki Rig Ved mein ye likha hai and Puran, Shiv Puran and this and that. But I don't know what are they all about and where does their origin come from? Why do they even exist?
Right. So again, a very valid question because there are so many scriptures, unlike the Western religions, we do not have just one book to guide us, right? So we have multiple books and that has happened because the religion has been around for thousands of years. And we've had a lot of seers and thinkers who have worked up a philosophy, a mythology of the religion. And a lot of analysis has been done on the human life, on the existence on this planet, what lies beyond. A lot of thought has gone into all this. There have been so many thinkers, that we have, so many saints and sages. So they have accordingly put their thoughts together. And so Ved Vyas, who's one of the most prolific authors of all time, he wrote down the 18 Mahapurans. He collated the Vedas. He basically got together all the Vedas. So Vedas are not written by Ved Vyas.
Okay.
So again, Vyas is the title of the person who breaks down the Vedas. So Ved Vyas again is the title of the person who did this for us.
Wow.
Okay, there have been different Vyasas in different yugas.
Okay.
So for us, this time, right before our Kalyug started, Ved Vyas did this. That's why he's called Ved Vyas. And his actual name was Krishna Dvaipayan. So Ved Vyas, he did this for us, and he also wrote down the Purans to explain the stories that were not very intelligible to people who, for masses, right? There are different audiences. There's the classes and the masses. But again, classes, I'm not talking about, the rich and mighty. I'm talking about people who may be more intellectual, right? So there are certain scriptures that were written down for the intellectuals in the society who are more knowledge oriented. And there were certain scriptures that were written down to explain those difficult intellectual concepts with the help of stories, right. So that the same knowledge, which the intellectuals are also having access to, the same knowledge is now accessible to the masses who are maybe not that intellectually inclined to read those scriptures, but who would readily go for a storytelling session or a Ram Leela session, right? And there are a vast majority of our population even today. Why is entertainment or movies so big in our country? Because a lot of people, again, there are not as many readers in the country as there are watchers. And that's true for all across the globe now. A lot of people are watching more and reading less. So if you have written a book or a thesis, which is quite intellectual in its approach, you have a very small audience. But if you want the same knowledge to reach a very big chunk of the population or a larger audience, you need to make it more user-friendly or more audience-friendly, right? And that is exactly what Vyas did. So Vedas and its ancillary texts, they belong to the subtext of scriptures called Shruti. And then the other texts are called Smriti, which have been written down from memory. Okay? So Vedas were heard. They were not written down. They were heard by the rishis. And these rishis are called, that is why they're called seers. Because they see. They have the vision of something, a vision which is a divine vision in which the mantra comes to the intellect, and that is what they remember and passed on to their followers. So the Vedas are called Aparishya because there's no Purush who's written it down. So Vyas, what he did was he compiled all these verses and hymns that were seen by different sages, and he compiled them in a easier to read format. So the Vedas now have 10 mandals, 10 divisions. And Vedas again, that's the Rig Veda that has 10 divisions. But there are 4 Vedas. So there's Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Athar Veda, and Sam Veda. So out of these, the Sam Veda is basically related to the performance of rituals. The Yagyas, the grand Yagyas that were performed earlier, it is about performance of the rituals. Rig Veda is the oldest. And it also has the most amount of historical data related to the early Hindus. And I'll refrain from using any racial terms, whether they were Aryans or Dravidians or whoever it was. But we'll just call them early Hindus. That's what they were, right? And it doesn't matter what race they belong to. So when we're talking about the scriptures of Hinduism, these are the scriptures. These are the oldest scriptures of Hinduism. And Rig Veda, actually, when you're talking about the timeline, so Bal Gangadhar Tilak, who was a freedom fighter, very well-known freedom fighter, he has put the timeline of some of the Vedic verses around 10,000 BC. Okay. So, but if you talk to the scholars who are into language studies and all that, they talk about somewhere around 1500 BC. Okay. But so that may have been the date when these were written down. Actually, so the verses originate, from a much older time, much older age. And that is what I was saying, that there's a lot of historical data, a lot of astrological phenomena are mentioned in the Vedic verses. And that is where the significance lies. How do you interpret your history? The Vedas talk about Saraswati River being one of the widest in the country. They talk about Saraswati, which is non-existent today, right? We don't know where Saraswati is. We just hear stories that Allahabad has Sangam where, Ganga, Yamuna and Saraswati meet. And a lot of people say that Saraswati flows underground. But, again, unless and until you approach these thoughts and these myths with scientific intention, you will not find the truth.
Exactly.
And a lot of scientists, and surprisingly not so many Indian scientists, but French scientists use satellites, etc., to map the region that has been described for the flow of Saraswati. Okay, and they have found paleo channels, which are older channels, dried up riverbed of the Saraswati, which used to flow right from the Himalayas through Haryana and Rajasthan and into the Gulf of Kutch. So it was an actual river. And when you plot the Indus Valley sites, the Indus Valley civilization, we all know it's called Indus Valley because it was around the Indus River that the first sites were discovered. But when you plot these Indus civilization sites along the course of Saraswati, you find close to 300 sites are along the banks of Saraswati.
Wow. Yeah.
And just about 30 to 50 sites are around Indus. So it is the historical data which is hidden in these verses that this civilization existed on the banks of Saraswati. That is why it was considered the most important. It is considered the mother of all rivers. It is considered the mother of all goddesses. It's the highest form of goddess, Saraswati. Vak and Saraswati. Vak is the Vedic nomenclature for her. So a lot of this data, which has been passed on through these thousands of years, got together, got collected, but it was not approachable to the masses. And Vedas decided to write the Purans to explain these stories. So the disappearance of Saraswati is mentioned in the Purans.
Okay.
There's a beautiful story where Brahma asks Saraswati to carry this dangerous fire to the ocean. And Saraswati says that, no, I will get scorched. I myself will get scorched. But he says, no, I bless you. Wherever you think the heat is overpowering, you can go underground.
Okay.
And the heat will not affect you. So Saraswati, this Puranic record of Saraswati going underground at certain places and then emerging at certain other locations and then ultimately merging in the ocean. And the Mahabharata has the mention of Saraswati disappearing in the desert. And the entire Rajasthan actually became a desert because the major river that was flowing through the state was missing now. It disappeared. So because of tectonic upheavals or whatever happened, right? So that's a different take on it. But that's so thousands of years, so much knowledge. That is why so many scriptures were needed. And what has been written and what has been told in the Vedas was explained in the Purans. And it was embellished. There were stories that were added so that a common person can remember these stories and he can understand the principles. So there is, of course, the Vedas, there's the Purans. In between is the Upanishads. So Upanishads are the philosophical texts. Okay. So Vedas, Upanishads, then the Purans, and then the Itihasas. So Itihas means this happened. This is history. And the Itihas basically contains the two major epics, which is Ramayana and Mahabharata. And then you have a host of secular literature, which is not related to religion, which is, Sanskrit writings, Tamil writings about people, about kings, Kalidas's works, Bhavabhuti's works, So, and there were so many regional literature that came up later. And again, interestingly, there's something called Agams. So there's Agams and there's Nigam. Again, you can divide the scriptures in two ways. Nigams are this entire body of work that I've talked about earlier. And Agams are completely different. And they are in Sanskrit and Tamil. And they talk about the practical aspects of Hinduism. How to build a temple. How to, the use of mantras, the use of tantra, the use of yantras. So all these things are covered in the Agams. So there are so many scriptures because they were catering to a different variety of audiences. But again, there's an injunction that wherever there is a doubt or wherever there's a conflict in the stories, it's always the Vedas that are supreme. So whatever is written in the Vedas is to be considered supreme. So so that's how it is. I'm not sure if I made it easier or I made it more difficult for you. But
No, it makes sense. And I think it answered a lot of questions for me as well, because I didn't have this separation of what is the sub-branch of Vedas, or our Upanishads came before Vedas or anything. So I think this helps clarify that. And also I was wondering to ask you this, that we always hear about a Western philosophy a lot, that it's quite modern if you compare it to the context of Hindu philosophy. Like you told, Upanishads are texts of philosophy. And I personally, like, this was just a very personal thing that I found Western philosophy. Like I'm a curious person for philosophy as well. So I found Western philosophy to hold some good ideas, some good theories that let your mind wander on and have some ideas about. But Upanishads, I think now I'm like ever more interested into the Upanishads, because if they have a philosophical essence to life, and they're also related to the
So Ripu, again, there's a very fascinating difference between Indian philosophy and Western philosophy. The approach is completely different. Okay. In Western philosophy, it's an intellectual exercise.
Yeah.
Okay. That's about it. It does not have any impact on your life. Right? It's not that you start following something different completely if you believe in one philosophy, right?
Right.
So it's an intellectual exercise. But for Hindu sages or minds who dwelled on philosophical concepts, not just in the Upanishads, there's also the Darshan Shastras. Okay. So when we talk about Shastro mein likha hai, so ye Shastra kya hai? What are these Shastras, right? So there's Dharma Shastras and there is Darshan Shastra. So Dharma Shastras lay down the rules for the society. So the rules are not written in Vedas, they're not written in Purans. It's the Dharma Shastras and Smritis that write down the rules, that this is how a population should behave. And again, a beautiful thing is that these Dharma Shastras are different for each yuga. So they recognize that when time changes, the rules also need to change.
Wow, yeah.
That's the beauty of these Dharma Shastras, and it's very clearly written, that, the Smritis and the Shastras, that they need to be like Manu Smriti. There's a lot of politics around Manu Smriti, okay? But Manu Smriti is not even relevant to today's time. It is meant for the Satyug.
Okay.
For Kali Yuga, there is a text called the Parashar Smriti, which is relevant. And this is given in the text itself, that, Manu Smriti is for Satyug. And, two other Smritis which are for Treta and Dwapar, and Parashar Smriti then is for the Kali Yuga. Okay. So there are rules written down, but again, the injunction is there that the rules can be changed according to the time and society's needs.
Yeah, and those are dynamic rules.
They're dynamic. They're dynamic. So more than rules, they are guidelines.
Okay.
So these are the Dharma Shastras. And when we talk about the Darshan Shastras, which talk about 6 different types of philosophies, 6 different philosophical concepts. And the Upanishads also give the basis of entire philosophy of Hinduism. And it's the Upanishads that give you the basic concepts that we believe in today. The concept of an Atma, Atman, the concept of a God, Brahman. So Vedas talk about multiple gods. Right? They don't. So in couple of verses, yes, they talk about an omnipresent God. The Purush Sukta is there. There are certain other verses also that talk about God being just one. But most of the verses are dedicated to different forms of the God. Different forms of that one God. Right? It could be Indra, it could be Agni, it could be Aditi, it could be Bak, it could be Usha. So Upanishads, they clarify that, all these multiple forms they coming from just one God. So they give you the concept of one God. They give you the concept of Brahman and Atman, the 2 different paradigms. They give you the concept of, the need to know. So there is so many verses like, Aham Brahmasmi. You may have seen, one of the series made it very popular.
Yeah.
It was used in a very negative way in the series, but what it means is that I am no different from God qualitatively. Inside me is the soul, which is the same quality which God has. I need to realize it, that I'm no different. They give the concepts like, the question like, Athato Brahma Jigyasa. So there's a dialogue where, that person says, fool, wake up now. At least now start asking questions. So they ask you to wake up. They ask you to start asking questions. So and again, Vedas have this very beautiful verse which talks about creation. It is called the Nasadiya Sukta. And it talks about creation. And in the end, it says, the God in the highest heaven, only he knows these things, the questions that they have asked in the verse, only he knows these, or perhaps even he does not.
Wow.
That is such a beautiful scientific approach. that, they are believing that, yes, he should have all the answers, but what if he doesn't?
Exactly.
So that's the approach that is further elaborated in the Upanishads. And that's what I was saying. The difference with Indian and Western philosophy is that Indian philosophy is meant to be lived. You believe in a certain philosophy, you believe that Atman and Brahman are supposed to come together, and you live your life according to that.
Right.
You follow the Varna Ashram Dharma to do your duty to the society, to your family, to yourself, and then you finally merge with God. So that is a difference. It's a way of life. When we talk about, Hinduism being a way of life rather than a religion, that is what you mean. That the philosophy of Hinduism talks about practical things, about how to approach life. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the principle that entire world is a family.
Right.
So that comes from the older scriptures. But the Purans, again, they elaborated how it can happen. How is the entire world your family? So there's the story of Kashyap Rishi, who has 13 wives, and his oldest wife, the eldest wife, is called Aditi, who's a Vedic goddess. And Aditi's sons are the Adityas, who are the gods today. So Indra, Agni, etc., all the entire pantheon, there are 12 Adityas, who are the sons of Aditi. Again, you see the beauty, these are the small things that we fail to notice. They are not called as Kashyap's sons. They are called Aditi's sons. Right? They are Aditya. So the importance of the mother. Diti's sons, who's the second wife, Diti's sons are called Daityas.
Okay.
Danu's sons are called Danavs.
Wow.
Right? So similarly, so on and so forth. And there are various wives who basically give rise to different species of life, including animals, birds, aquatics, and vegetation. So that is a Puranic concept. It's a story to tell you. Of course, a woman can't give birth to a horse, right? Or a chicken, right? But it's a story. It's a story to tell you that all of us are related. We are coming from the same father, Kashyap. And even today, if you know this, you're Bharadwaj, right? So your Gotra is Bharadwaj. So Bharadwaj Rishi was one of the most accomplished rishis. We'll have an offline discussion on him. But he was one of the most accomplished rishis. A lot of people who do not know their Gotra are given Kashyap Gotra.
Okay.
Because Kashyap is a universal father.
Okay.
That's the concept. So the same concepts that are in the older scriptures, the same philosophy carries on in the stories in the Purans. And that is how the sages have divided these things into different ways, different manners to reach different audiences.